I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Corey Mylchreest all about his current projects, Hostage and My Oxford Year. And I wanted to start by talking about My Oxford Year and just talking a little bit about building that character and developing Jamie, because
Mm.
it feels like there's a huge amount that's part of him with his family and the way that he was raised. And I was interested in how foundational that was to developing him as a character and his outlook and perspective on life.
Wow, what a question to start us off. Yeah, I mean, like with anyone, it is, as you say so rightly, it is the foundation. It's the it forms them, and their outlook on everything else, and even with the things that change people later on in life, the ways they react to that is more often than not, formed by the things that have happened to them before. But yes, and although I, in the world, I'm incredibly privileged. I'm nowhere near as privileged as Jamie, and so that's an immediate thing. He's been surrounded, by the relationship with his dad, but his mum is incredibly supportive. But it's a very high achieving family and a very prestigious family with a lot of high expectations, and also I would say quite patriarchal. His dad calls the shots, not in a domineering way, but well, I guess Jamie does find it domineering. um and he's also grown up with an ally in his brother, so he's had a third party point of reference for everything that's happened in his life. And obviously when we meet him, he no longer has that. And so I imagine that he feels, like he's taking on life, at half power, because he's had this thing stripped from him. But also in that family, they're deeply, deeply British. They don't talk about their feelings. They joke about everything, and are incredibly sardonic and cynical. And yet, Jamie has a real positive outlook on life, and a zest for it, a love for it, a deep, deep appreciation for it, the gift of life. I guess also informed by the fact that he lost his brother, and he knows what mortality means more than most, definitely more than most at that age anyway. And he's someone who's lucky enough to have been brought up with an understanding of literature and poetry, but lucky enough to also have so clearly from a young age as well, the thing that he wants to do with his life. A real drive, a real purpose, a real center point to aim all his sort of life objectives and goals at. And then everything gets turned upside down when Anna comes around.
And you brought up his language and the way that he communicates in the world is kind of like very sarcastic and very sardonic.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and it's kind of a shield, but then it's also a way of connecting. It's that very British sense of humor that connects people at the
Yes.
same
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
And so how did you find that it both was his way of protecting himself by being really sarcastic, but also it was kind of his way of connecting and having a shared sense of humor with people?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a beautiful way of putting it. So first of all, props. But it really is. It's his weapon, it's his shield, and it's also his heart. It's so deeply him. Um, and he also uses it as a tool when he educates, when he connects to people. And some of his favorite poems are the ones that seem to be talking about really awful things, and yet, and dealing with awful things, painful, tragic things, and yet find peace, if not happiness and love and connection through those. And so, clearly Jamie is someone who is not necessarily comfortable, but is adept in times of sadness at bringing the beauty out of every moment, and that is so deeply entrenched in his love of and use of language.
No, I love that description. And I wanted to jump into talking about some of the spoilers in the film because, you know,
Mm,
when we first meet Jamie, we see him as someone who doesn't really connect with people easily and, kind of has these fleeting romances with women. And obviously, we learn about his diagnosis and why that is actually the case for a very different
mm.
reason than we initially perceive. And so I was really curious about how you went into playing that first act of the film, knowing that eventually we're going to understand it from a very different perspective, but kind of still needing to play it authentically to him.
That is such a good question. One of the first things that I guess I do whenever I get offered a job, whenever I get a job, um, is 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 to really analyze sort of dramaturgically the writer's intention for the whole piece, and then what the role is of my character, not in their point of view, but from the point of view of the writer or of the director or whatever. And Jamie's role narratively for the audience clearly is to set a trap. You know, you've got to be someone. He's got to take the audience on a journey to make some presumptions about who he is in terms of being a sort of Lothario and really confident and charming and all of these things, and sort of as a base layer, so that when you find out everything later, or when their love is so revealed to be so true, you're really taken on a journey, and it's not something that you could have seen coming a mile off. Although it is a rom-com, so you can see the connection coming a mile off. But in terms of a personal relationship, yeah, and so the clearly, once you've done that, you then have a person who is able. You see, as an actor, you see, okay, right. Well, if I've got to do that, if my role and duty to the director and to the writer and to the story is to be someone who is believably those things in the beginning, but also has that other side to him. That's suddenly a much more well-rounded person than if you were to play it as something there and then something there and then something there. So I think doing that, you realize your responsibility in leaning into those things in those acts, but you can't lose sight of everything else. You can't completely be someone else. I will say though that Ian, the director, did have to constantly tell me to stop being sad, because with Jamie, even when he's talking about really sad things and really opening up, there's a scene where he says, I've never told anyone that, and so that's a really vulnerable thing for someone to do. But he's still joking about the fact that he's saying it. He's still not saying it connecting to his true feelings on it. And yet it's so easy as an actor to see those things and go, right, well, I understand what I would feel when I'm saying these things, so I'm going to lean into that. But he would have to completely, he'd always pull me back. He'd be like, mate, we're 45 minutes into the film, you can't go there yet. And I so appreciate, having seen it now, I appreciated it when we shot it, but yeah, I really have a deeper appreciation for Ian's ability to do that, amongst other things. But yeah.
That also makes sense in terms of the fact that Jamie's become very adept out of a necessity to compartmentalize his life. He really doesn't let anybody know what's actually going on behind the scenes. And so
Mm.
he's living these two different versions, and in trying to push Anna away and convince her to leave, but her refusal to, and still wanting to be close to him, he's kind of
Mm.
forced to then figure out how to bleed the two together. And I was interested in kind of what you found in his perception of how he handles kind of becoming this fully formed person because of her ultimately.
Yeah. God, these are amazing questions. Um, yeah. I mean, do you know what? I'm not even sure if that's something that I consciously thought about, but you're so right. He, in the same way that he uses his language as both a weapon and not a weapon, a shield and an open arm, you know, so too does he use, romance. And I guess to an extent sex, because he's someone who opens quite a lot of relationships like that, because he's clearly so desperate and yearning for a connection like that, and yet you know because of his Britishness, because of his sort of stoicism almost, because of his cynicism, and I guess also because of his vulnerability, specifically losing someone, afraid of being hurt, afraid of abandonment, all of these other things. He has the desperation and the will and the want and the yearning for connection, and yet also an absolute need for independence. Because it's a really scary, really scary thing. And yeah, when Anna comes along, there's no room at the inn in either of those houses, and he's forced to sort of meet her outdoors. And I think that's we see him constantly try and either through labeling it or literally telling her to leave or telling her to do something else with her life. We see him put up these defenses and try and get her out. But ultimately, it is where he feels most connected, most himself, most whole. And I guess something that I did think about was the fact that he is someone who never talks about how he feels, and yet is so linguistically dexterous and understanding of language and poetry. And really, that's his way of connecting with the world. That's his way of connecting with those really deep things. And it's no coincidence that his love of Anna and their love comes out of a mutual appreciation for the poetry and for the language and for literature. Because I guess in many ways for him and maybe for the audience, Anna is the literal embodiment of that. And so Anna sort of joins literature in being the thing that brings the two sides of Jamie together.
And the story also captures the complicated nature of the relationship that he has with his dad. And, he just feels like his dad's trying to control him, and his dad is just trying to not lose his son. And they both have their different perspectives of their relationship. And I kind of love the naturalism of how what brings them back together is building a toy car that reminds them of his brother and getting completely drunk and then fencing with all of the tools from the fireplace with each other. What were some of the layers that you really found in that relationship, and did you feel like that was the perfect way for them to reconcile with each other?
Absolutely. It's again very British to sort of let bygones be bygones over a drink. But I mean, I really loved that relationship. I think the best scenes, the best dramas are when two people have completely opposing opinions, completely opposing arguments, and yet both are right. Because there's no one right answer, and it was such a joy to explore that with Dougray, the man playing his dad, Jamie's dad, and he's been affected by his dad more so really than anyone else, and definitely feels the weight of his dad and the decisions that he thinks Jamie should make. Also, when you lose someone, you have specific memories, particularly about the really hard stuff towards the end. And I think, Jamie associates a lot of that with his dad. And so even if there was no disagreement, I think it would still be difficult, because he's shared that with his dad, and he often doesn't want to think about it. And so he can't not think about it when he's with his dad. But then also, he completely disagrees with the way that his dad treated his brother towards the end of his life. And at the end of the day, it's just two people dealing with grief in very, very different ways. One of them who's very accepting of it, and the other one who's in complete denial and ready to fight until they drop really about it. And it's so lovely that Anna's the reason. It takes a third party. It takes an objective view to go, you guys love each other so much, and there's nothing really holding you back. It's almost like you learn to have a difficult relationship because of the habit of doing it, and once that habit is suddenly synaptically broken, you're stood there and you're like, oh, what were we even fighting about? And it's so lovely. There's when Anna and Jamie leave their house towards the end of the film, it's just a short hug, but it felt really lovely doing that on the day. And there's so much said and not said, and it's, yeah, it's so lovely. Even after the drunkenness and the hugging and and the real man love, they still retain a little bit of that upright Britishness, but it comes from a completely different place in that moment, at the end.
And you're so right that it had to be Anna and it had to be an outside perspective to that. And
Mm.
one of the other things that it feels like Anna does for Jamie is she's someone who's able to disarm him and also push him outside of his comfort zone in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah,
one of the scenes that I loved where she does that is when she puts his name in for karaoke.
yeah,
Just your delivery of singing that with the Coldplay song. And I wanted to ask about just finding how you wanted to be ever so slightly off rhythm and where you wanted to go off key in that.
yeah, yeah. You know what? I really don't know what happened that day, because I mean, I come from quite a musical background. My mum's a musician. I can sing. I wouldn't say I'm an amazing singer, but but I can sing, I'm quite rhythmical. And so I was really worried about that scene. I was, because deliberately trying to sing badly is quite a difficult thing to do, without it sounding like you're deliberately trying, and yet when I got up there, I guess I didn't, I deliberately didn't really learn the words to the song, uh, although it's a song that I know quite well, so that was quite difficult. Uh, and I didn't warm up my voice, obviously, but it was really remarkable how bad it was. It really took me by surprise, and then I got nervous, and I was like, maybe I'm being too bad. And then I got into a place where I was like, I can't make myself better. I've messed this up in my brain. Like, there's something wrong. Like, and then I think I heard the producer saying, like, how badly can he sing? What's the real thing here? Because I think we might need to like make it a little bit better. And it was just, and it was meant to be Corey playing a man who was being humiliated, and it just turned into Corey feeling absolutely embarrassed. Also, no matter how much prep there is, no matter how much that you're going to be someone who pretends to sing badly, when you're there in front of, I think there was maybe like 70, 80 extras that day, you know, a lot of the times, the supporting artists, they don't know the ins and outs of the story, they don't know the ins and outs of the scene. And so I really felt the need as Corey to be like, by the way, guys, I'm going to sing badly now, but I can sing, so don't worry about it. And obviously, you're not going to say that, but it was just really humiliating, and it's exactly what was needed, because that's what Anna can do for Jamie. Not only can she take him down a peg, but also can do exactly what he's doing in his lessons, which is challenging people to really live life and break past their boundaries of comfort. And out of it, they have a wonderful true moment, and they see each other, which is exactly what Jamie tries to teach him in poetry. It's just, I guess it's hard sometimes to practice what you preach.
No, I love that description. And in jumping over and talking about your show, Hostage, uh,
Mm,
you're playing a young man whose stepmother is the president of France, played by Julie Delpy, and
yeah.
we learn very quickly that she kind of ideologically represented everything that he believed in, and he campaigned for her, wholeheartedly, but now completely disagrees with where she's gone politically. And I was interested in kind of how you actually looked at her character and who she would have run as a politician, and how that kind of gave you an insight into, his own beliefs and his moral complexes.
Yeah, yeah. What a question. I mean, I had various different political figures that I believe that she most aligned with in her, almost like previous life when he campaigned for her. That I feel as Corey, a real kinship to. But also, I had pictures of Jurgen Klopp. I'm a massive Liverpool fan, and the idea of this real, not only political leader, but a figure that you would go to war for. And that you feel loved by, and that cares about the community. And something that I really remember feeling in multiple scenes is there's a real loss when someone, it's not that someone dies. It's that someone changes from something that you were so deeply in love with, admired, inspired by. And when someone throws all that away deliberately for power, and she has her reasons, there's the far right movement coming in, and she's trying to keep them out of government. So she has her own, whatever. But Matteo, to his detriment, is a man of principle, and really just doesn't he can't come to terms with the fact the person that he loved, the person that he fell in love with, and the person that he fought for politically has sacrificed all of her values. Yeah, it's a really powerful thing to experience. Yeah.
And he also, again, has a very complicated relationship with his father in that show as
Yes.
well.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Yeah.
And it does feel a bit like there's certain aspects of him that probably are in direct rebellion to his father's ideologies.
Yes. Yeah.
As well, and especially with his dad running several newspapers and being able to control the narrative, he's kind of grown up understanding what that looks like as well.
Exactly.
How do you feel like that really formed and shaped him in so many ways?
Yeah, I mean, it was. Do you know, it was an interesting debate that I had with myself, because a lot of things on the surface you could argue that Matteo does to deliberately spite his father, or to deliberately rebel against his father. And so, how much of it was coming from political views that he'd grown up, he'd grown organically himself by being surrounded by the negative stuff with his dad, or how much was it not that he completely believed in it, but that he just hated his dad that much that he was willing to just do the exact opposite thing. And I do really firmly believe that it's the former, that it is him, it's who Matteo is, and it's just because of the things that he's seen through having his father as a father. Yeah, I think, again, it's an incredibly difficult relationship, and a relationship really that he denies ultimately. He doesn't have any association with his father anymore deliberately. But you mentioned something really poignant about the fact that his father has created the narrative, globally, definitely nationally, with his power of the press and with the newspapers, and specifically talking about refugees. In real life, as well as in Matteo's life, we see such hideous demonization and dehumanization of people that ultimately, if you trace it back, are fleeing because of the actions of our government. And so you can't support one and not support the other. And I think there's just so much injustice in that. In real life, but also for Matteo, he cannot sit idly by and watch it happen, watch the manipulation of the truth just go unchecked. And although he doesn't have the power that his father has, he does have his body and his mind, and he can get on the ground and do work that way, which is why he's so invested in the things that he does. Yeah.
And in the relationship that he's in when we first meet him in the series, I feel like you can tell a lot by the fact that, and again, touching on spoilers for the series, that he reveals to her the truth about his relationship with his stepmother and the fact that at some point. And I wanted to ask about filming the scene where Vivian and his dad come to his place, and his dad's probably never set foot in there before, and then his girlfriend's there, and it's just everything confronting, but it actually feels like it's more confronting for them because he's already revealed the truth and there's nothing to surprise him.
Yeah. And even I think his dad, one of the first lines in the scene is does she know about you and your stepmom? And it's not an actual question. His dad presumes that she doesn't know and is just trying to hurt Matteo, and actually, Matteo, not that there's ever a winner in a conversation, but Matteo beats the shit out of his dad there, because he's stripped him of everything that he had in his arsenal. He can't control him. He doesn't, I'm in danger of quoting Matteo here, but he doesn't take his money. He doesn't take his name. He doesn't benefit from anything that his dad does. He doesn't benefit from any of the privilege. He's rejected it all. and his dad then tries to use what he believes is a secret to damage Matteo. But Matteo is someone who is incredibly open and honorable, and so of course has communicated that with Saskia. If there's an advocation for communication in a relationship, it's that moment, because if you are united in the truth, then nothing, you know, no one can say anything, no one can hurt you. It's such a lovely scene, and it was so lovely. I think it's the only scene that we get to do, the four of us, and it was such a pleasure to do it. And there's so much going on. You know, you have each character has a really specific, detailed, interesting relationship with each other character, and it was such a great thing to do for me playing Matteo, was to finally take agency and say the things that he wanted to say to his dad for so long.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And outside of that, I remember with Queen Charlotte, you know, when that came out, you talked quite a bit about how you put a lot of pressure on yourself, and particularly for a lot of the more dramatic scenes and some of the more challenging things that's asked of you. And I was interested in kind of what your relationship with that pressure that you put on yourself sometimes as an actor has felt like doing projects since then.
Yeah, God, really good questions. I mean, I'm always crippled by fear and nervousness and anxiety and pressure. Not that that's from anyone on the team. It's just, you have an expectation of yourself, and once you've done the work, you know how good it can be and how true it can be and how powerful it can be. And so you want to honor that. No great work ever comes from that place, because you really have to be relaxed and free. But it's a dialogue that I have with myself daily when I'm on set, is how to deal with that pressure. I think the thing with George in Queen Charlotte was that, you know, I'd done so much research on this one guy, and I felt like he had been so misrepresented historically, you know, in works of nonfiction, you know, in documents and books and stuff, but also in fictional depictions. You know, I felt like he'd been so misrepresented, and I really wanted to do justice for him, you know, because you end up, you know, when you try and get in someone's head for that long, you really end up with a kinship. And there are different aspects that about these two projects now that are very similar. You know, there's all the stuff that I wanted in my Oxford year, that I wanted to be as respectful and detailed and really, despite it being a rom-com, really do service for, you know, and be as truthful and personable and specific as possible. I think it's really, you know, as an actor, it's your duty to be as respectful as possible through your dedication to specificity, you know. And so there's all of that stuff. Also, I wanted to be believable as someone who's teaching, you know, and so you got to do I did a lot of research. I did so much more research than I needed to do about poetry and all the poets. But it was really important for me to feel like I could, if I needed to, if they said, Corey, just improvise everything that you know about this poem that he's handing out, then I could go, you know. And similarly with Matteo, you know, I watched a lot of, you know, really powerful, quite horrible sometimes documentaries. But I spoke to people, NGOs and stuff, you know. I you know, again, I felt the responsibility to bring as much specificity to his work and his ideals and the things that he stands for as possible.
I love that, and it's so impressive, just the level of detail that goes into all of this, and you know, they're both fantastic projects. So thank you so much for talking about them. I appreciate it, Corey.
Oh no, it was so wonderful. I honestly, your questions were just amazing, and you're so kind, and it was such a pleasure.